Welcome back, my friends, to TFT Hyper Roll with Autarch, and a very special episode. This is our 5 builds to get to Hyper. It applies mainly to patch 13.24 because it's going to be here for a few weeks, and hopefully we all have some time over the holidays to play through some of these comps and get into Hyper by 2024. Now, I want to say a couple of things ahead of time. These are not necessarily comps designed to win every single game. There are counters to them. So don't expect to be coming in first over and over. The goal is to climb, so the goal is to hit top 4. And based on all the games I've played and everything I have done, I have found that these 5 comps in particular are most consistent in getting you into the top 4. Yes, they are perfectly capable of winning depending on how your luck goes at the end, but your goal is to make it into the top 4. So since we are in a match where we get offered a disco to start, let's start with the Disco Dazzler build. Now, a couple of things about this build. You do not need to start with it to pull this one off. You don't have to start with Disco and Dazzler, but you do need to make sure you have at least a 2-star Nami, 2-star Autarch, and 2-star Gragas as you get into late game, because you're gonna need them. Now, if you do decide to start with Disco Dazzler, that's okay too, just expect to lose a little bit along the way. Your goal is to build lots of AP items, Rabadon's Death Cap, Archangel's Staff, etc. that will go on to Twisted Fate, Sona, and Ziggs at the end of the game. Tank items will move on to Blitzcrank, so you're going to be making a lot of use of item holders in this, whoever you can get. There's a pretty specific endgame you want to end up with, and we'll get to that. But in general, if you find yourself getting a lot of AP items early in any of these builds, consider switching over to Disco if you have the chance. Let's also talk a little bit about augments. I find Final Ascension or any of the Ascension ones to be good. This is because the Disco Balls provide healing, and that will keep your team up longer, thus you'll get later in the game and gain more power. Keeper is also very good for this, and that is because you're going to have everyone clumped together, so they're going to be able to start with a shield, and the key to the end game of this is to essentially create giant clumps to keep your back group, I can't even say back line because it's not a line, but your back group safe. And if you are already in it, something like Pandora's items is pretty good because you will then be able to craft the items that you need in the end game, and that's going to help you out a ton. Speaking of end game, in stage 8, drop your chosen. Look for either Blitz or Twisted Fate to replace them, preferably Twisted Fate if you can get it. You need the 5 discos: Nami, Autarch, Twisted Fate, Gragas, and Blitzcrank. Then you want to bring in Echo, who will tick Sentinel along with Blitzcrank, Sona, who will complete Spellweaver with Echo and Gragas, Ziggs, who will be another Dazzler and Hyper Pop, and Alawi, who will tick Bruiser. You want your final board to look something like this, with just a glop of a front line in front holding everyone back, protecting Ziggs, Twisted Fate, and Sona, who are going to be doing damage. Make sure you put Sona in the damage position. Expect this to easily take you into the top 4 and sometimes even get you a victory. Let's move on to another build I really enjoy, but is also very, very consistent in getting you into the top 4, and that is the Country Moshers. Now, generally, I will only go into this one if I can get Country right off the jump. That means either it's given me an Urgot, Samira, or both out of the NPC round, or I manage to get a Country, Tom Kench, or Katarina early in the match, and then can form Country, of course. Since the Moshers come with healing, I like to add to that healing with healing augments such as either healing orbs or harmonious, as that will maximize the amount of damage you're doing and how long you can stay in the match. Generally, if I pick up a Tahm Kench, I don't like to take him to 3 stars. I did here, but I usually like to dump him around stage 7 to try and pick up an Urgot or Samira headliner, since they will be a little bit stronger as a headliner going forward, but you can make it work with a 3-star Tahm Kench as well. You definitely want to bring in Set and Gnar as additional moshers. Set will also tick Bruiser along with Tahm Kench. Key items for Urgot: Titan's Resolve, Bloodthirster. Key items for Samira not shown here. Deathblade is great, but I also like to go Last Whisper and Infinity Edge, but Urgot is likely the one who's going to carry you. I will often spend my time hoping that I can get a country emblem so that I can get the ultimate Hecarim at the end, but that's gonna happen maybe once or twice a season, so I wouldn't go for that. But you can get to the 6 Mosher 5 country since there is crossover and you're going to 10 in hyper roll, and anytime I have done it, it has brought me into the top 4 without any issues. And of course, I'm not going to ignore the obvious build, Rapidfire, Guardian, Punk build that has pretty much gotten a lot of people into hyper. A real key augment, if you can get it, Heroic Presence. If you see it, this is where you're going, because you're going to be able to get the Pantheon. Your entire front line is going to cause damage. You're looking primarily for a Rapidfire Jinx, but you can do this with pretty much any of the Rapidfire champions. I like Jinx the best simply because she is going to keep gaining power throughout the entire match. But if you go with Aphelios, pretty much same items as Jinx. It's going to be a Rage Blade, then lots of damage amplifiers, Deathblade, Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, etc. The only one that's the exception is Senna. She is AP based, so you're still going to want to get a Rage Blade, but then you can go Jewel Gauntlet, Rabadon's Death Cap. You can go Spear of Sojin if you want her to cast more often, but you're going to want a pretty big amplifier on top of that. Let's talk a little bit more about the augments, Unified Resistance, Final Ascension, any of the Ascensions actually for that matter. They're all good on this because your front line is going to be key. You want your back line to just power up. The longer the front line can hold people in place, the more power you're going to get out of your back line, and you will end up winning some fights you didn't think you were going to win. It's early in the season and I've already done 3 videos specifically on this build, so if you want more details, go to those, but just know it is a fast start build. You're likely going to be at the top of the health charts for most of the game. Generally, I try to use a Mumu as the main tank unless other opportunities present themselves, but it's nearly a guaranteed top 4 as long as you get a decent start with it and it's giving you the champions, but they're pretty easy to hit since your key starting champions are 1s and 2s. Let's move on to another build that works really, really well, but I like to see the right setup for it, and that is Big Shot Sentinels. I like to start this when I get a Corki Big Shot, and this is another one of those champs that I will take up to 3 stars if I can get it. If you don't end up getting to 3 stars with Corki, then you likely want to dump him at around 7 or 8 and start looking for either Misfortune or Ezreal as a Big Shot headliner. Corki can carry you, but really only if you get to 3 stars, otherwise you're going to need to replace him. I look mainly for the Big Shot as my trait to be the headliner because there are 6 Sentinels in the game, so you don't need a Sentinel headliner in order to make this all work. This build follows a very similar pattern as the Guardian Rapidfire. The items are also similar for Corki. Rage Blade is a must, after that Infinity Edge, Deathblade, Last Whisper, anything like that. The difference is in this build, unless I'm given specific items that aren't going to work in the backline, I try to focus on itemizing mainly the backline. Obviously, you're not necessarily going to be able to avoid itemizing the front line because you're going to get items that are only really going to work as frontline items, but
try to focus on the backline because the Sentinel trait is going to give you really most of what you need in terms of tankiness. In terms of augments, it's pretty much the same as the Rapidfire Guardians build with one exception. Obviously, Final Ascension, Unified Resistance, all really good. Healing ones, definitely not bad, but Sticks and Stones is especially good here because you don't tend to itemize the front line as much, and that means the entire front line of the opposing team is going to get shredded and sundered, which will make it much easier for your backline to chew through them. I don't like that as much in the Guardian build because I like to put items on the Guardians since they are not as tanky in and of themselves as the Sentinels are. Expect to have strong starts with this, and much like the Rapidfire Guardian build, little bit weaker endings unless you get lucky towards the end. But you're not going to have a problem getting into the top 4 with the type of starts you have. As you can see here, 8-2, still have not lost a match, and even against this Akali team, the team is so overall tanky that it's able to hold up. I wouldn't necessarily try and force this one. I would just look at it as a really, really good option if you see that early Corki or other early big shot and are getting a lot of Sentinels. If you put it together, you will pretty much guaranteed get into the top 4. There is one final build I want to bring your attention to before I call this a wrap, and it is actually my favorite build to build, but I wouldn't force it, and that is the Pentakill Moshers. There is just something incredibly satisfying about putting together the Pentakills and the Moshers because they are both so annoying to play against, especially once they power up. For me, the key to this build is getting an early Pentakill champ and then the Moshers to go around it. Look to dump Olaf around 7 or 8 so you can hopefully get either Viego or Karthus as your next Pentakill champ. You can get easily to the 7 Pentakills, 6 Moshers, which makes an almost unbeatable team. Your items for Olaf are going to be Titan's Resolve and Bloodthirster. Those are your key too. They will transfer over to Yorick. You need AP items for Karthus because he is going to be the key to your build towards the end. Good augments for this include trait-specific ones like Submit to the Pit, Jeweled Lotus, Harm Assist, Healing Orbs, really anything along those lines. The Jeweled Lotus is probably a fallback for me because that's really just for Karthus. Avoid Final Ascension. Your matches are going to be over long before 15 seconds have elapsed, so you're never really going to get the power up for that. So this is them. These are the 5 builds that I think everyone should know to make their climb to Hyper much easier. Builds like Disco, Rapidfire Guardian, and the Sentinel builds are much more reliable than the Mosher builds with either Country or Pentakill that ultimately rely on a lot more luck later in the game when you need to pick up the right champions. However, I find those builds a lot more fun to build and fun to play. In the end, as long as you are getting into the top 4, you are climbing and doing fantastically. Hope you enjoyed this video and it was helpful, and as always, have an absolutely awesome day.